delighted to be here. Thank you very much, Tony Henderson, for finding me, I guess, and virtually it's Matt Ballantyne who connected us. And thank you, Tony, and Karen as well for bringing me out here. It's very, very nice to be here. I'm honored. And I guess life was a lot simpler when I first came to London in 1981. Maybe I'm dating myself. Does anybody remember those days? You know, with regard to media, we didn't have all these millions or thousands of media options. There was BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV, right? And ITV was a big upstart, and things have changed dramatically since then. But a little bit about me. I did go to a little engineering school just outside of Heathrow in 1981 to 82, Brunel University, and worked for London Electricity Board that year. That was the year the IBM PC came out. Does everybody remember that? Again, I'm dating myself, I know. But yeah, a little thing called the IBM personal computer. And what I would do was, I was just doing data entry, you know, for London Electricity Board. And they had all these land holdings files for all of their leases, you know, throughout the country. And some of these documents were written on original parchment, you know, hundreds of years old. And I would basically type these in, and every once in a while I'd have to go down into the vault and pull out the original document on parchment. And you know, I was thinking, gosh, this is going to make life a lot easier for people because everyone will have access to it, but something's missing too. You know, they won't smell the smell of that vault, and they won't feel the parchment. But I think we all know, you know, the importance of getting this stuff out there. I then went to a company called Ovid, my first startup. And we were doing natural language search interfaces, you know, a decade before Yahoo. For example, if you typed in AIDS, we would map you into acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. If you typed in GI bleeding, we would map you into gastrointestinal hemorrhage. So we sold that system to like British Medical Association, Centers for Disease Control. This was like 1988 to 92, and that company got acquired by a Dutch company called Wolters Kluwer. And then I went on to work for Reuters. Another time I came back to London and was working for Reuters when London was its world headquarters. So I spent a lot of time on Fleet Street and pioneered online content syndications. That was years before RSS, or really simple syndication, was invented. And at that point, people's eyes start to glaze over and they start nodding and falling asleep. But you probably remember, or maybe you remember, really simple syndication. Reuters had a need to get their financial quotes, you know, stock quotes, foreign exchange data, equity information out to all their partners. And you know, I was the new kid on the block with the internet. 1994, HTML over HTTP. We started doing away with all those proprietary online systems like CompuServe and Genie and Apple's eWorld, and moving towards a standards-based platform, standard markup language over a standard delivery protocol. Things exploded. So I said, you know what? Let me help Reuters do what they were doing offline. Reuters doesn't own a TV station, doesn't own a newspaper, doesn't own a radio station. It syndicates its content to all those different partners in the offline world. So I said, well, you know, let's take this model and move it online. So I helped Reuters create products that would deliver content to AOL, you know, big partners like Yahoo and others. With Reuters' blessing, about 1998, I decided to productize this and moved out to California, as most young entrepreneurs did in those days. Venture capitalists were, you know, throwing money at people like me, and raised $30 million in under 2 years. And then that company got acquired by Oracle in 2002. So at that point, I took 10 years off and just hung around, you know, in paradise in California. It's sunny, you know, 10 months of the year in California, in Tiburon, where I was living. And I kind of got caught up in that. It's quite a nice life, quite frankly, but I got a little bit bored. And so I wrote a book. And then I just started tracking, came back to New York to publish the book called Be the Media. And I just, you know, knew a woman 20 years, you know, earlier who ran an executive search firm. And she offered me a job at the search firm 20 years earlier, and wanted to create an internet practice. And when I came back to New York, she said, you know, that job is still yours if you want it. Why don't you create the digital media practice? And I said, sure. And what I started seeing was there were chief digital officers. This was 2010. In 2010, I tracked 50 chief digital officers globally. And then at the end of 2011, there were 100. And like, I was really kind of shocked that, you know, other executive recruiters, Russell Reynolds, Spencer Stewart, Egon Zender in the Netherlands, you know, you name it, they weren't tracking this trend. So I thought, well, let me create a database and start looking deep into the skill sets. And then the next year there were 220, and now this year there's 500. And since it's doubled every year, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's probably going to double again next year. I want to be conservative, contrary to Gartner Group and others that are really saying this is going to explode. But that's where the Chief Digital Officer Summit and Chief Digital Officer Club sort of incubated at this executive search firm. I give a talent map every year, a talent map being an idea of where are these people, what companies are hiring, how much are they making, what are their skill sets, what's the career path, which I think is the most important statistic. Where do these people go after they become chief digital officers? So there are some really, really good examples that we can talk about that may help you move forward really quickly in achieving your objectives. So this was the first Chief Digital Officer Summit, but I want to bring up another, if you go to CDO Club, and I encourage you to do so, I try to give all our assets, I hate to say, away for free, but I think it's really important. This is too important not to share, right? So what I did with the first Chief Digital Officer Summit was I took all the photos and all the videos from the first CDO Summit and put it up on both CDO Club, you can see it on Summit 2013 for CDO Summit, and also on CDO Club. But if you scroll down through, it's basically exactly what happened through the entire day. Vivian Schiller gave the opening keynote. Vivian, an incredible background. Vivian was CEO of National Public Radio, NPR, in the States. And you could arguably say she took a downgrade by becoming CDO at NBC News. And now she's head of news and journalism partnerships at Twitter. But Vivian gave just an incredible opening keynote, and it goes on and on. I had a panel on publishing, we had a panel on music, a panel on entertainment. And you can see just by the people who were on the panels, Chief Digital Officer, American Media, Simon & Schuster, Condé Nast, Weiner Media, which is Rolling Stone and Us Weekly, Men's Journal, Forbes Media, the CDO. He was actually president of Forbes.com and CDO of Forbes Media. I don't have to go through them all, but you can see Disney, BBC, that's Daniel Heath, who's EVP and Managing Director of Digital at the BBC. Jason Sykin, as a matter of fact, was founder of PBS Digital Studios. Jason is now content editor-in-chief and chief content officer at the Telegraph. This is a fabulous panel, one of my favorites. We had the Chief Digital Officer for MIT, Brent Turner, Chief Digital Officer for Harvard University, Perry Hewitt, and the Chief Digital Officer for Columbia University, Sri Srinivasan. And in addition, we had Bernardo Rodriguez, who is Chief Digital Officer for Kaplan. That's just a fascinating panel, so much so that we brought them both back, Perry and Sri, to do what I called a digital duet for the 2014 summit. And I'll put those assets up. But having said that, that's the CDO Summit site. I would encourage you also to visit the CDO Club site. So this is CDO Club. The reason I bring this one up is there's a couple of posts up here that are directly related. And again, I'm saying this ad hoc because I was learning a lot from downstairs. The first two posts you can see are, the first one I published today. So we put out a press release and published all of our findings. Every year I try to give a state of chief digital officers. And once again, growth has doubled this year. 7 CDOs became CEO, 4 CDOs became board members. These are critical positions, both inside and outside the public sector and private sector. But the one I want to point you to is this Rachel Hout. Rachel was previously Chief Digital Officer for New York City under Mayor Bloomberg's administration. I named her Chief Digital Officer of the Year this year for 2014. She did such an incredible job, and there's a video interview we did with her that you can watch. But imagine the enormity of New York City. So she has a number of different constituents that you don't have to worry about if you're a chief digital officer at like Starbucks and you're just trying to create an app where people can buy coffee, right? They have to worry about inclusion. Step 1, everyone in New York needs to get online, right? Step 2, they need to be educated about what to do. They also have to worry about literacy. In New York City, there are 800 languages. It's one of the most linguistically diverse cities in the country. And their 311, which is the dial for information, handles 180 of those 800 languages. So they have to be very careful about how they build their websites. They can't put up a lot of PDFs because they have to deal with people who can't read or can't hear. They have to be able to, the computer has to be able to read it, so you can't use PDFs. All kinds of interesting things. And then think about the size of the scope of creating a digital initiative for New York City. And one of the reasons I gave her the CDO of the Year award was She had created a roadmap, a digital roadmap, which is, I think, where you almost are, right? You're at the point of creating a strategy, and the digital roadmap was written in 2011. Under 2 years later, they had accomplished all of the objectives, 100% of the objectives in the digital roadmap. As a matter of fact, they started out with 33 objectives, and they added 7 more. They didn't take any away, they added more. And think of the constituents that she has to address. 3 big ones. One would be their other departments, agencies, right? So you got everything from the city homeless services to the Metropolitan Transit Association, hundreds of agencies. The next level would be employees at the city and the state level. In New York City, 250,000 employees. At the state, 400,000 employees. That's roughly the size of General Electric. That's a massive undertaking for one person and the team. And then go down a step further, the third set of constituents would include the customers, right? And they consider the constituents customers, which I really love. You know, you never hear the word government and customers in the same sentence, but they firmly believe in customer service. And so that would entail, I think it's 60 million in New York State, 40% of that's in New York City. It's a massive undertaking. And the way she accomplished all those objectives was just with her style and grace and just a sense of ability to get things done and cut through bureaucracy was nothing short of amazing. The other thing too is I think if I gave out the Chief Digital Officer of the Year award to a company every year, it would get pretty boring pretty fast. I think you really have to address NGOs, nonprofits, education, municipal, more so than the people who are famously working at Starbucks or the BBC. So it was important to me also to elect a female. Roles and responsibilities when you bring a CDO in are critical to differentiate the requirements between the CIO, the CTO, the CMO, and the CDO. When I think of the role of a Chief Digital Officer, it's more front end, it's innovation, it's customer facing. CIOs don't necessarily do any of that. And on the CIO side, what they're normally comfortable with doing is back end, keeping the lights on, making sure everybody has internet access, making sure, look, the other big thing that they do is if there's ever a disaster, right? If you ever, God forbid, lose all your data or there is an outage, you're not going to call the Chief Digital Officer, which is why I believe the CIO role is not going to go away anytime soon. But the challenge is CIOs are being picked at from 2 ends. And those 2 ends are taking the best part of their job. I was quoted in Forbes a couple of weeks ago as saying that the article was titled, "Don't let a Chief Digital Officer take the best part of your job." And clearly that's what's happening. The CDOs are doing all the quote unquote exciting stuff, and the CIOs are left with a lot of keep the lights on stuff. And also a lot of that stuff's being outsourced to the cloud. And so the role is in transition. So in the majority of cases that I'm seeing, the most successful CDOs are reporting into chief executive officers. In the case of nonprofits or NGOs, they're reporting into an executive director. In the case of a university, they're usually reporting into a provost, vice provost, very top line. As a matter of fact, some of the bigger online education initiatives, they're not always called CDOs, they're called vice provost for online learning. In nonprofits, they're usually reporting into the executive director. That's how critical these roles are. No surprise to me, 2 weeks after this interview, the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, was a very progressive mayor, grassroots, really did not want to hire a C-level title for this because he felt a director would be okay. Now he's backtracked, and not only is he saying, Rachel used to report into media and a technology group, but de Blasio is now saying that he wants that position to have its own budget, have its own headcount, and report directly into the mayor. And the mayor of Boston 2 weeks ago also announced that he's going to hire a chief digital officer directly reporting into the mayor. So you're seeing this role take on an additional, I think it's a great sign that they're seeing that this, you can't do the things that you need to do without a budget and without a headcount, because then you have to go beg the CIO or the CMO for the approval to do these things. And those people aren't always necessarily on the side of the CDO. They see them somewhat as competitive, so in some cases. So I think we're seeing that a lot. So anyway, that's the Rachel story. So what I was saying is in 2005, I've been quoted as saying the first chief digital officer was hired in 2005, but I've just found out that that's not true. There's actually a couple in 2003 and 2004. That aside, that was Jason Hirschhorn, who was first hired by MTV as chief digital officer in 2005. Why do you suppose that happened in the media sector? What I'm assuming is, in the beginning, the first industry that got disrupted by digital was the music industry. And that's why the next one was George Kliavkov in 2006 was the second CDO hired by NBC Universal. And I think NBC saw that, wow, music's first, entertainment's next, right? Long form video films. So they started hiring. So we saw this sort of growth of advertising and media hires. Actually, in truth, before Jason, you had David Yakir in the advertising sector. And there were a number of different people in the advertising sector that were banding around with the Chief Digital Officer title. So interesting in advertising, then it just exploded. My assumption is that we remember the days of Razorfish and Agency.com and all these startups in the ad world, right? Why did that happen in 1994, 1993? Well, the big incumbents just didn't get the internet, right? They didn't understand the implications of what was happening. So you had everyone from Chansu jumping out and starting Agency.com, realizing the implications of this for their clients. So suddenly it just started exploding through the advertising world, and almost every major ad agency had chief digital officers. That all occurred because the incumbents finally got a clue that these young upstarts were, running circles around them. So what you started seeing happening in 2008, 2009 was the big incumbents, WPP, and the others, went on an acquiring spree and started hiring or buying all of these small startups, bringing those folks back into the fold, and they didn't have a title for them, so they were giving them this they couldn't make them president of WPP, so they ended up making them chief digital officer. So you saw the real tremendous growth in 2008, 2009 in the ad sector on chief digital officers. And this is where I came in, right? This is where I started. I had started at Chaddock Ellig, this executive search firm, right about here. And so for the year before, I was scratching my head saying, wow, there's all these chief digital officers hired. They're getting these great salaries. And executive search consultants, we get 30% of the first year cash comp. So if you got a guy making $500,000, that's a $150,000 fee to me. That's no small fee. So as a search guy, you kind of want to get these high-end positions that are relatively lucrative. So I was kind of shocked that no other search firm, Russell Reynolds, Spencer Stuart, Egon Zehnder, was covering this. The other big gap was, why isn't Gartner covering this? If this is eating into, I think your question in the back was, if this is eating into the CIO's job, why isn't Gartner, scared or at least trying to figure out what's going on here? And then on the CMO side, which is also under some kind of threat from chief digital officers, why isn't Forrester, covering this? So I just quietly started, creating a database, and I would literally go out and I would interview every time there was a new chief digital officer hired. I would, friend them on LinkedIn and do what any other normal person would do, right? What are your skill sets? How much do you make? What were you making before? All these kinds of things. And I put all this into a deep database. So then it was really getting crazy because it went from 75 to 225, but then last year it went from 225 to almost 500. So we were at the point last year where there was a chief digital officer hired almost every day. And so, I'm no rocket scientist, but I would say if it's doubled every year, I would say conservatively, we're probably going to have 1,000 CDOs by this time next year. We're on track to do that. But Gartner, you see that little sort of light figure up at the top. Gartner is actually saying it's going to triple. So all of a sudden, Gartner wakes up, right, and says, "Oh, something's going on here. We got to get involved in this." And 2 years ago, they were quoted as saying, by 2015 or 2014. 25% of all organizations will have a CDO. Now, I don't know about you, but that's ridiculous. They see this as clearly a threat to the CIO base. I think now they've changed their mind, like you said, and they're now seeing this as an opportunity. And so that opportunity is clearly, enunciated in that gap. So what they're saying, the reason I think they're saying it's going to triple is they're interviewing their CEOs and they're interviewing their CIO base, and they're finding that a certain percentage of their CIO base are grabbing, if not the responsibilities, then the title itself. For example, 7-Eleven now has a guy who's been CIO there for 10 years, is now Chief Information and Digital Officer. So they may be right. We may triple next year because the Gartner base is going to grow. The CIO base is going to grow the base of chief digital officers as well, and I hope that's the case. Yeah.
If I may ask, what sector has been the slowest?
Slowest is like anything regulated, any of the regulated. And I want to get into chief data officers because the opposite is true there. In the chief data officer space, regulated industries are hiring like crazy, and I'll touch on that. But anything like pharma, medical, insurance, banking, very slow to adopt anything that's going to innovate, and they also have regulatory issues that prohibit them. Same thing with other sectors that have been slow to adopt, consumer packaged goods. And the one that doesn't adopt at all, can you guess what sector is not adopting chief digital officers at all? Well, government is increasingly, but very slow, just as slow as regulated. Yeah, tech. Yeah, so you're never going to see, you're never going to see a chief digital officer at Google. That's like having a chief radio officer at the BBC. It's just never going to happen. So they're digital natives. They don't need this. It's digital is ingrained in the entire culture. Everyone is a chief digital officer. It's, as I go back to 2005, it's those industries that have been disrupted by digital that are now all of a sudden waking up. And so it woke up MTV in 1999 with Napster. It took them 5 years to figure it out. And now it's starting to slowly hit all the other sectors. A good example here of one that's being disrupted that was never disrupted before is education, right? So in academia, you never had to worry about any technological disruption until the MOOCs. Does everybody know what the MOOCs are? Yeah, massive online. You could finish it for me. Open courses, massively open online courses. That's like Coursera, TEDx, Apple's iTunes University, Khan Academy, right? Familiar with all these? Coursera, Udacity. And it's that interview with Sri Srinivasan from Columbia University is very telling. He says nothing has swept through academia and disrupted academia in such a short period of time ever before in history. Not electricity, not the light bulb, nothing. Because within a very short period of 2 years since Sal Khan put up a couple of courses for his nieces and nephews to study math, it has completely disrupted the education market. So now you've got a chief digital officer at Harvard, chief digital officer at MIT, there's one at Columbia, there's one, and there are other titles too, like vice provost of online learning at Stanford University where it started. So now all of a sudden you've got even the academic sector being disrupted by education. So I believe I've started a number of different companies before. I would say this, I started a company on equity. And then that got bought. And then I built a company on debt. But this is the first company I ever built with real revenues and real customers. And there's no slowing down. And there's no better way to build a business than on real revenues and real customers. And let's take a look at what I started to do. So then I started creating a survey to really get more information out of the CDOs that were out there. Looked at the skills, background, skill sets. We talked about this a little bit. Who are for your question in the back of the room, who's making the technology decisions, right? That to me is a really fascinating piece of this because there's a battle going on over the budget, right? If you're a chief digital officer, you want to own the headcount, you want to own the budget. And for me, as someone analyzing this space, I want to see those budgets grow and look at it not only individually, but in the aggregate. So now we can say, wow, this chief digital officer space is this big. And now we can start making some interesting forecasts on how big it's going to get and at the expense of what groups and individuals within the existing organization. So at any rate, this is where I ended up. Again, 488 CDOs in 2013, should be about 1,000 by the end of this year. Chief digital officer salaries are relatively high. We'll leave out NGOs, nonprofits, education, but in for-profit world, anywhere between $250,000 to $750,000. Chief data officers making even more. There's a chief data officer recently hired at Citibank, 1.1 million salary, 400,000 bonus, all in, that's a $1.5 million cash package. I stand corrected on the first one that was hired. I found that out 2 weeks ago, but it was a good start. We found out we went back to 2003, the exact same year that the first chief data officer was hired. And again, big right now in the media sector and in the advertising sector. So I want to touch on chief data officers just for a second, because this too is just a fascinating thing that I'm kind of shocked that up until this year there wasn't much attention paid to it. There was a lot. I mean, MIT has had a chief data officer conference for 6 years now, but it was kind of geeky and it wasn't exactly trendy. Now that has completely been upended. The first one was hired, Karen, at Capital One Bank on the West Coast in 2003. But we all know, as you rightly point out, this isn't a new field at all. Data analytics goes way back. There are people who hold similar titles, chief data scientist, chief analytics officer, and that all started in earnest, right, with the advent of the internet. So when Google, Yahoo, Amazon, Netflix, all these folks take the most, there was a guy, Werner Vogels at Amazon, one of the most famous CTOs out there. This went on way before, and it's interesting to see that it was just in banking and finance, and as you pointed out, the regulated industries started to adopt chief data officers. Look where it started to take off. And again, this is where I came in, but I saw the growth start right here. Does anybody want to venture a guess as to why 2008 you saw growth in chief data officers in the
crash?
Yeah, crash, obviously. Government steps in, we got to start regulating you people. You need, governance, rights over the data. We need to be able to do if we have any litigation, we're going to have to do investigations into email, your emails. Everything has to. So, what are these chief data officers good at? They're good at taxonomies, data governance, data management. Actually, I think I've got a slide that covers compliance, government permissions, but most importantly, privacy and user security, as well as dealing with all of these other things revolved around data. So no surprise then that it starts to take off in the banking sector here, but you also see a lot of chief data officers in pharma, medical, some of the other regulated industries. And now again, this is all kind of just CPG, it's media, it's publishing. I think the world is starting to realize that we need somebody or a team that's dedicated to focusing just on the data that the companies are bringing to the organization. So that's where Forbes interviewed me and came out with this kind of crazy title, which is Don't Let a Chief Digital Officer, and I would add to that, or a Chief Data Officer steal the best part of your job. If you're a CIO, you're under tremendous amount of stress. Most of your job is being outsourced to the cloud. Some of it's being outsourced to India and other places for the customer service and call centers. And now you've got the chief digital officer on the front end taking all the fun stuff, all the innovation, all the app development, all the cool products, all the mobile stuff, right? And then you got this chief data officer animal on the back end stealing all the most important stuff about the data and owning it. So what's left for the CIO? And they really are in a process of sort of reinventing themselves. So iCIO, Jessica Twentyman writes for the Financial Times. In this case, she wrote for iCIO.com. She did a couple of great articles. But basically, she was saying the same thing as Dan. And as we pointed out earlier, Gartner is actually actively encouraging their base of CIOs to take on the role and responsibilities of the Chief Digital Officer. As a matter of fact, they do an annual Gartner symposium. Has anyone ever been to a Gartner symposium? Globally, they do these all over the world. And their keynotes last year were all about, the importance of the Chief Digital Officer and how you need, because you got to remember, from Gartner's perspective, they're losing their base. They're a, how do we call it, to be fair? Subscription research firm, Like you subscribe to them, they give you data, and sometimes they blow smoke up your skirt. A lot of times they do. And when they come out with a stat like, in 2 years, 25% of all organizations will hire a CDO. They don't know what they're talking about, or they're just trying to get press. Because you would never get that kind of ramp up in such a short period of time. But at any rate, they're obviously aggressively now trying to make their base move over to CDO. Now this was my quote. This quote was directly from me. What I'm seeing is that, which is contrary to Gartner, CDOs are not technical people. The backgrounds that I'm seeing, and I've got a database of every single chief digital officer, maybe a few mom and pop shops, but I'll show you their backgrounds. They're not technical. They're business people. They're GMs. They're P&L responsibility. They've had experience as CEOs, presidents, general managers. So a CIO may, in fact, rebrand themselves a chief digital officer, but I don't. So my end quote was, CIOs have always been trying to get that place at the boardroom table, right? They've always wanted to be in the spot where they can help make the strategy decisions. And the CEOs always kind of poo-poo them. I'm a CIO from way back, so I'm a fan of CIOs. I know it doesn't sound it. But the truth right now is that it's a much faster career track to go from CDO to CEO than CIO to CEO ever. was. And I think it's the case when you look back on their backgrounds. Let's take a look. Let's deconstruct the marketing organization. In general, what's happened because of all that data intensive, let's figure out our customers and what they want, you end up getting titles like Chief Marketing Technologist. Forrester has said that 80% of all organizations already have someone with the title or the responsibilities of Chief Marketing Technologist. That Chief Marketing Technologist looks a lot like a Chief Digital Officer. So there are these, this Venn diagram where you have the intersecting circles of here's the CIO over here, here's the CMO over here, and here's the CDO. And where they intersect are where if the CEO and the board doesn't clearly define roles and responsibilities, you can have a lot of battles. And you have to define the budget and define the headcount. And one thing to me that is never clearly defined is who owns the data and the analytics team, because that's the most critical field. The CMO wants to manage data analytics, the CIO wants to own it, and the Chief Digital Officer wants to own it, and of course so does the Chief Data Officer. So that's where the battleground is right now, and who owns that headcount. And to me, the best use of that organization is just like connecting to the internet. That should be a services organization that helps every division. It shouldn't be owned by marketing or the data officer or the CIO. It should be a service organization. I think that's where you find their most successful companies. So this is the CDO story. These are the backgrounds. These are the skill sets. When I go through all of their backgrounds, these are the kinds of things that I'm seeing. They're entrepreneurial. By they, I mean Chief Digital Officers are innovative. They've got general management background. They've got their relationship builders. They have to work across all silos. They have to work with the board and the CEO and all of their colleagues in the C-suite. And that's what led to this. So that was my second preface. This is actually what I came to speak about, which is doing a deep dive into who these people are and where they come from. So I basically went through this database of 500 people. And, shocker, it's like 91% male, white, between 30 and 60. Almost like insanely, so this was 80%. This is when I did it for 2013. So that looked at this historically up to 2013. 80% white, 90% white, 80% male. And then this is 2014. No change at all. A little bit of change, but we added a couple more percent in Asian population. Age. This was 2013. Again, I think, what is that? 98% between 30 and 59. Not much change at all in 2014. Am I going too fast? Industry sectors by 2013. So this goes back to your question. What are the companies that are getting disrupted? What are the industries that are getting disrupted that are hiring CDOs? So by far, advertising was the biggest sector at 40%. The majority of the 500 CDOs were in the ad sector. And then neck and neck, you had media and publishing. Media would be like Telegraph, publishing would be HarperCollins. Media would include broadcasters, publishing would include newspapers and others. But this is the more important stuff to me. Like I look at the long tail, because over time, this is where it's all going to start to even out. We're going to start to see these grow, and we're already seeing that. As a matter of fact, I could show you. This is what happened this year. So a little bit of change. Again, last year, 40% advertising, 15, 9. These are the areas where we're starting to see some growth. So in the nonprofit space, unfortunately, because it was a crazy long tail, I bundled government, education, and nonprofit into one big group, which is probably a bad thing to do. I really have to break that out next year, so I promise you I'll do that, especially in municipal, because I want to kind of track that separately. But retail grew. Retail like CVS, pharmacy outlet in the States, 7-Eleven has Chief Digital Officer, BB Stores, Sephora, and others. PR and communications is pretty high. Financial now is starting to grow. There's a Chief Digital Officer in insurance at Nationwide, a couple in the banks. And then medical, even sports, if you consider Red Bull Sports, I consider them publishing, but Red Bull has a CDO, NBC Sports has a CDO.
Where would you put online commerce on this?
Yeah, so it's a tricky one because it's generally been in the tech space. So they're not hiring as many Chief Digital Officers in the online commerce space as in the traditional, more incumbent.
I think actually what's interesting between the previous year is the previous year you had 75% of CDOs who were in the advertising, media and PR organisations, which is what you'd expect. That's
where it started.
And that's now reduced. So the following year that's reduced, that's down to about 65%, which is sort of suggesting that they're not needing titles such as CEO in those areas as they mature.
You saw the last slide.
No.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly right. You're exactly right. And that's where this is heading, right? So what I'm saying is that as these companies become digitally mature, there's no longer a need for it. So what Gardner was saying is that that title eventually goes away, so we're not going to pay attention to it. My point was, are you insane? If that title goes away, the person who made that company digitally successful is next in line to be CEO. And any executive search professional or any recruiter, or you want to get in touch with these people when they're not CEO. Because it's really hard to get a CEO or a board member to return your call, but if you've helped them in their career path to help them become chief executive, they're going to remember you down the line. And I think the same thing is true from the analyst space. Gardner and Forrester should be nurturing these people who are CDOs. And you're right, that title, in my opinion, and it's already happening. So what I'm saying is not conjecture on my part, it's already happening. And we're going to take a look at how that's happening. So here's tenure, which kind of gives you can kind of see within the last 3 to 5 years, what is that, 90%, CDOs. So, and then you've only got a couple of companies, a couple of people who've been around for longer than that. So again, another way of saying brand new. So what's happening globally? So here's the interesting slide from 2013. I tracked 88% of CDOs were in the States and just 7% in Europe. And just look at the growth in 1 year. So Europe went up to 23%. So from 88 in North America to 68, and from 7% up to 23%. So Europe just catapulted last year. What's driven that? So, and interestingly enough, I think related to what's driving it is the demo came down. The age demo came way down. But I believe because advertising is taking up the majority of the sector, it's driving the change and also driving the age demo. And I think that advertisers want to get to the younger population. They want to get to the younger demo. So they're hiring younger CDOs, really get that space. So that's kind of what I'm seeing, and it really took off in the ad space in Europe last year. And the fascinating thing is that from the perspective from the States was that these are all seasoned, chief digital officers are all seasoned, mature professionals who've run P&L, run companies before. But it seems like that's not the case anymore. They don't necessarily need that, and especially in the ad sector, they're not looking for people to run the company. They're looking to attract the younger demo for their clients. So then in the States, majority of, I guess maybe a question for the audience, why do you suppose the majority of CDOs are in the Northeast in the US? Big time advertisers, lots of media, lots of publishing. And down in the Southwest, you've got a couple of ad agencies, but you've also got DC, so you've got a lot of government agencies hiring chief digital officers. And you also have some media companies like Gannett, USA Today, and others. And then the Midwest, you could consider Chicago, a lot of advertising agencies, DDB is up there. And you've also got, that whole Midwest of Target, Best Buy, what else is up in the Chicago area? Yeah, it's big. So that's all starting to grow. And then on the West Coast, a little bit slower because it's mostly the, Google, Yahoo. They don't need chief digital officers. I hate to use the word mature because it's only an 8-year-old title. It's kind of crazy to talk about maturity. But if the advertising world is the bellwether or the canary in the coal mine, the leading indicator, what ended up happening was exactly what you said. As the agencies became more digitally savvy, there became less of a need for chief digital officers in the ad sector, right? So it's changed much more quickly, and you're also seeing more CEOs come out of the ad sector than in the others as well. But as far as skill sets go, there's, in the beginning in the ad world, they would take the chief digital officer. It was let me put it this way. It was more of an advocacy role, both internally and externally. You had somebody who could talk the talk. So they would take the chief digital officer out of the closet. They'd wheel him in front of Coca-Cola and say, "We really get digital. We've got this amazing chief digital officer, and he's going to, tell you what we're going to do." And then they wheel the guy back in the closet, and they do that for each of the clients so that they feel everything is good. But now we're at a point where it's no longer high-paid navel-gazing and advocacy role. These are chief digital officers who are rolling up their sleeves and actually getting the job done. So they're much more 5-6 years on. They're much more operational, not advocates. And now, if that was what happened in advertising 6 years ago, you could see the same thing playing out now in these other sectors. So now at McDonald's or at CPG or in other sectors like retail, you're seeing the same thing happening. They're hiring people who are more, I hate to say, talking the talk, but not necessarily executing. But I think that, again, that role will evolve as the company becomes more digitally mature. So here's the difference in the States. That was last year. This is this year. Northeast we're starting to see more in the Midwest and in the Southeast. So this leads back to my question about what is the career path. So I had two examples. The Harvard Business Review wrote 2 years ago that there's a lack of digital leadership on boards, on boards. And they found that in the Fortune 500, I think the quote is up there, right? There's only 9 companies, so less than 2% of the Fortune 500 have what they call digitally mature boards. Same thing is true here in the UK, right? I mean, Russell Reynolds did a survey, it was reprinted in the Telegraph, and the Telegraph said that the FTSE 100, FTSE 250, so the FTSE 350, 1 in 10 companies surveyed had digital representation on board. That means at least one digital member. And they're, interestingly enough, in the States, that 9%, the digitally savvy boards, we all know who they are. It's Apple, it's Dell, it's Cisco, it's IBM. They're already digital, So my question now is, if all that digital talent is tied up in these chief digital officers, why are we not seeing more board appointments of chief digital officers? And again, this is something that's playing out in real time. Just last week, Adam Brotman, chief digital officer of Starbucks, was named to the board of Neiman Marcus. So we're really seeing this stuff being played out in real time. And I want to go to a couple of examples of this because this is, to me, where it all starts to get really interesting. Basically, I took my database and I created a spreadsheet, right? So this is just a quick spreadsheet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll through it really fast so Paul can't save it on screen. But this is the companies that they work for. So if you watch this column as we scroll through it, you could see Starbucks, Havas, Huntington National Bank, Best Buy, Deutsche, American Media, Ogilvy, Group M, on and on and on. But I'm also tracking, just for my own crazy knowledge, their Twitter followers, Clout Score, and how it's grown from 2013 to 2014. Matter of fact, we came up with a top 10 list, the top 10 chief digital officers on Twitter and top 10 chief digital officers on cloud. And this gets back to Karen. I think we were talking about this, and somebody in the ad sector, some chief digital officers are not really great at Twitter. They're not really great at Facebook and social media. Why do you suppose it is that an ad agency CDO isn't like number one in cloud?
I do some of this stuff. It's incredibly hard work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It takes a lot of brain power.
And in the ad space, I think a lot of CDOs are focused on helping the client build their Facebook followers. Coke and Pepsi, they want to get likes on Coke's Facebook page, not their own personal Facebook page. So a lot of it is the cobbler shoes, cobbler's kids with no shoes. But I went through the exercise just to see. I had the database. I figured, well, let me go and see what's going on here. And the results, if you look at it that way, are kind of fascinating because that's not a lot of followers. I mean, in the big scheme of things, 50,000 followers is not a lot. But Shri is the leader in chief digital officer, and follower count is not a great, statistic to come up with to discover influence on any social media. But again, I thought it was a good exercise. But once I got past the top 10, it just fell off the floor. It went down into the thousands and into the hundreds. So again, chief digital officers, they're not really doing digital. And again, some of the fallacies you see coming out of Forrester, where Forrester will say, oh, this is a threat to the CMO. The marketing department is going to be threatened by chief digital officers. Not bloody likely anytime soon. I mean, this, and then if you look at the following by Clout Score, you all follow Cloud or Peer Index, or, it's a way of measuring online influence. I hope you get to see that. But these guys, Jason and Shri, were tied for first at 81. And then again, it just kind of, the top 10 just falls off the map into the 60s and 70s. I mean, I have the same cloud score as Shri, it's not anything to be proud of, but they're not really the social leaders. So this was my, getting back to your point on what happens next. And to me, this is the most interesting. I'm a people person, so I always wonder what's next for the company and what's next for a chief digital officer. So in just the last few years, or actually in 2013, 7 CDOs became CEO and 4 CDOs became board members. That to me is the best stat ever, because what you'll see is that it's not surprising when you see their backgrounds that happened. Now what's surprising to me is there weren't more CDOs becoming CEO, and I'll get into that because that was my surprising insight in the deep dive I did this year. But these are all CDOs who became CEO, and you could see it's really advertising, media, publishing. Charlie Redmayne here in the States, great example. I'm sorry, in the UK. Charlie was Chief Digital Officer for HarperCollins. Then he became CEO at Pottermore, right? Harry Potter online initiative. HarperCollins missed him so much. He did such a great job at Pottermore that HarperCollins hired him back and made him CEO of HarperCollins UK. That to me is exactly what Chief Digital, if they're doing it right, that's exactly the career path for a Chief Digital Officer. And these were the 4 board appointments. So Rob Norman is Chief Digital Officer at Group M. He's now with Jonathan Miller on the board of BBC Worldwide. Jonathan's not a surprise, right? Jonathan was chairman and CEO of AOL. He's a big investor. He sits on the board of Sherry Redstone's Advancit, which is a venture capital private equity firm. He sees a lot of deal flow. He's probably getting a lot of board opportunities. But Jim Barr is Chief Digital Officer at OfficeMax. He joined the board of Shop.org. So looking at that, to me, then I started to think, well, I really want to know who these people are. So just went into LinkedIn, made some phone calls, and looked at some of their backgrounds. We talked about Charlie. Let's look at Vivian Schiller. Vivian's a great example of someone who just doesn't care if she takes a step down in title. She was president and CEO of NPR. You all know what NPR is, National Public Radio in the States. So, and look at her background. This is where I say again, if Gartner thinks these people are coming from a tech track, they're not doing any research. How is it possible that one person, I'm just one guy, how is it possible you got a multi-million-dollar organization, hundreds of thousands of employees, and you can't go to LinkedIn to see that what you're saying is completely wrong? So I'm going to keep calling them out until they turn around, but she's not a technical person. She's a business person. Chief Digital Officers, entrepreneurial, GM, Senior VP and GM of Discovery, which was both joint venture between Discovery and New York Times, then Senior VP General Manager of New York Times Digital, then President and CEO of NPR. Where does she go from there? You would think, wow, she's going to be a board member or something. So what does she do after NPR? She takes a slot as CDO at NBC News. So you could consider that a downgrade in title. And then she goes from there to head of news and journalism partnerships at Twitter. She doesn't even have a C in her title anymore. So if you think about it, she's gone from CEO to CDO to head of news. But in my opinion, she's increased in impact and influence, because the ability for her to influence other organizations by being at Twitter and being able to work with every journalist, every publisher, every news organization gives her a lot more influence, a lot more impact. And by the way, she probably got a nice little sum of, she probably got a nice compensation package as well. But that's a great example of people who just don't care that, they don't care about titles anymore. It's more about influence. The most successful ones have a budget, have a headcount, and have the buy-in from the CEO, from the executive director. Rachel Hout in New York City, when she started, she wasn't reporting to Mayor Bloomberg. She was reporting into the media and communications office, and she didn't have a headcount. But what she did was she developed alliances with the agencies and departments across the entire organization. And what she did was 2 things. One is, most people come in and create a digital roadmap or a digital strategy, and they only look at what you want, or they only look at your needs assessment. What she did was she also looked at an asset assessment, and she went to every organization, because there are hundreds of thousands of employees in New York City, and some of them are already, there's a pothole app, which is what she gives us one example. There's a pothole in the street, we've got a GPS, we've got a mobile phone, I take a picture of it. This was an asset that had just languished, nobody used it, because what ends up happening in government situations is you build the app and then the excitement leaves and you don't continue to iterate and keep it up, and nor do you promote it or market it. So what she did was she worked across the organization to build alliances and get champions of people who could actually help her achieve their goals and help the organization achieve theirs. So that's one way of setting it up. Mayor de Blasio, who's just come in now, is seeing that wasn't the optimal way for her. She did a great job given all of those constraints, but what he now wants is he wants the Chief Digital Officer to report directly to him, to the mayor and to give the position a budget and a head count so they can actually accomplish more. So you don't have to beg the other departments and the other agencies in the government to give you the resources that you need to get things done. So that's in government, just one example. In for-profit media companies, look at the BBC. Dan Heath, I mean, Dan's got 500 people reporting to him. He spends when he came to the Chief Digital Officer Summit, he flew in from India. He had been in India. He's got 300 people in India alone, So for him, it's a completely different story than somebody, for example, at a smaller media company like The Telegraph or The Guardian, where you don't have as big of a head count. And again, I think in every situation we're seeing chief digital officers have to work in conjunction with the CIO and with the chief marketing officer and with the chief technology officer to actually sometimes get things done. But this is why I say, when I say that 7 CDOs this year became CEO, that's like I was quoted by Harvard, MIT Sloan Management Review, I was quoted by Forbes, but to me, the more interesting thing is there should be more. Like 7 is amazing, but these people were all presidents before this. So that's kind of where I'm going. I don't know if we need to go into too many of these, but I'll do one more. Jean-Briac Perret, earlier this year, he was named president of Discovery Networks International. Before that, he was chief digital officer at Discovery. So let's look at his background and say, well, what drove this? Again, was it a technical role? He was a finance guy. His GE audit for GE Capital, went into biz dev for NBC Universal, was chief financial officer at Bravo at NBC Universal, senior VP of New Media and Strategy, and president of digital distribution. So this guy was president before he became CDO. Became CDO for a year or two, did a great job there. Now he's president of International. So the backgrounds to me are kind of interesting, and that's why when I go back to this slide of do you have the digital leaders you need? What I did was I did a deep dive into their backgrounds. So 500 chief digital officers, and to me, all the stats I've been quoted on in the past, completely inconsequential. These are the 2 stats that fascinate me the most. I spent the last year looking at all their backgrounds. And I looked at 2 sectors, advertising and media. And the most amazing stat was, in the advertising sector, 60% of chief digital officers were previously CEO, GM, or president. 60%, so almost 2/3 of chief digital officers in the ad sector were previously running the show. And then I looked at the media sector, and I found that 33% of people in the media sector were previously GM, president, or CEO. So again, when I go back to Gartner, these aren't really technical people. They're no threat to the CIO. These are actually people who are building a digital business, and as they become successful, I believe they're going to be board members. They're the future leaders of our society, in my opinion. And that's starting to play out in the marketplace. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Tom.